talking about how to retain the COVID-19 donor, that donor that has come on during the current pandemic, possibly for reasons related to the pandemic. Before I go any further, my name is Nick Ellinger. I'm Moore's Chief Brand Officer. Happy to be with you today. Feel free to shout out any questions or let me know anything that I should be covering in either the Q&A of Zoom or in the chat of Zoom. I'll try to be looking at either and want to make this as interactive as possible without opening the phone lines and having kids in the background, although I might have that as well. So without further ado, let's get started. So we're familiar with disaster donors, and it's not a new phenomenon here in the United States. Here in the United States, Jonestown flood of 1889 killed 2,200 people, caused about $500 million in damage in today's dollars. The Red Cross president at the time, Clara Barton, name you may be familiar with, came to the United States from Geneva to lead the disaster recovery efforts and lead the fundraising there. So against a $500 million toll in today's dollars, she raised almost $100 million in today's dollars from Americans and from people around the world to help support efforts against the to rebuild after the Jonestown flood. Current disasters obviously are a little bit quicker because you don't have to go barnstorming. You don't even have to wait for the mail. Online giving response is very quick. So people ramp up quickly and they ramp down just as quickly. You may not remember the name Aylan Kurdi. You probably remember his photo down, though. He was the 5-year-old Syrian boy lying face down on the beach in Turkey. And after that photo was published, there was an immediate focus on the humanitarian catastrophe that was going on in Syria and how were refugees treated, but it was for that moment. So these were the donations that went into the Swedish Red Cross. Sweden was taking in a lot of Syrian refugees at the point. And so the look at this, they found that donations returned to baseline in 6 weeks. And so the study on this, the links are at the bottom. In answer to the inevitable questions, yes, we are recording this. We will have it up on YouTube afterward. Yes, I will also send out the deck. No, it won't be as good without the live Q&A that you're able to do, but such is life. So the study's authors said that empathy faded, even though the number of refugees seeking asylum in Sweden was still very high throughout the period. So it wasn't the suffering that went away, it was the attention to the suffering. And that's not unique to that circumstance. Hurricane Harvey, when it hit, had donations about 31 days after were above baseline, but after that they returned to baseline. Hurricane Irma, that came right after it, lasted only 11 days. And so there's this quick spike and then a fall. Now this crisis isn't like that. So this is from Aegis, which is our caging and processing company here at Moore. And you can see year over year, keeping the company, keeping the nonprofit specific, keeping the amount of mailings about even. There were some that would pull back a little bit, some that went up a little bit, but we're seeing response rates go up by about this %. April was up, May was up, June was up in terms of volume. And that was after a Q1 that was, yes, it was up 4.5%. Q2 was up 7.5%. So over that time, there was a sustained increase in the number of people giving. And each week from the 3rd week of April on till literally today, the average gift has been up 9 to 12%, right in that range. It isn't just mail that we've been seeing this outpouring of support. Almost 70% of nonprofits saw an increase in online fundraising from May to April as people became more serious about COVID-19 and realizing the level of impact that it had. In May, we had Giving Tuesday Now. That produced comparable results to November Giving Tuesday. on a per email basis, people emailed about half as much, and revenues were about half as much from email. So about similar response, not to say that if we went greater volume, we would have gotten that, but that's half of Giving Tuesday is still a very good online giving day by and large. And we've seen giving from donor advised funds jumping. More has been dispersed from donor advised funds in the first half of this year as a percentage of the amount that's in there than all of last year. So March and April jumps in year over year and month over month increases in that type of giving. Still, in my opinion, not enough. Donor advised funds, you're putting that money away for a rainy day, and it's pouring out there. So trying to get all of these funds off the sidelines so that we can put them into work in our communities is still incumbent upon us. And it's a large part of why we're talking about retention today, because the value that we can get out of acquiring these donors right now is in how you'll be able to retain them come down the road. It is a time where people are looking at new nonprofits. So this was a survey that O'Brien Garrett did with the Nonprofit Alliance. 54% of people said they're still supporting the same causes and groups. 15% said they've reduced their givings, but it's these ones that are in the middle that show this kind of flux. So I've started giving locally. Is 30%, 38% said they've added additional groups to their list of people that they give to because of this crisis. And 18% said that they've shifted their giving to other causes. So they have an increase like some others, but they've taken from Peter to pay for Paul, where Paul is usually going to be a food bank or someone on the front lines of this crisis quite often. But we've seen organizations as diverse as veterans organizations, museums, animal charities, hospitals that, pediatric hospitals that work exclusively on cancer. You don't have to be on the front lines, so to speak, in order to message around this crisis, as we talked about in our webinar a couple of weeks ago, nor do you have to be on the front lines in order to get people to break their patterns. This is an unprecedented time, this is a very precedented result. When crisis strikes, we've all seen disaster monies go to disaster organizations. When the beyond that, when the Great Recession hit, you saw food banks have a significant increase in their giving from 2008 to 2009. Feeding America had a Q4 increase in giving of 50%. Overall, food banks had a 32% increase in giving from all of 2008 to 2009. When you had 9/11, giving to the Red Cross was so strong and to the September 11th Fund was so strong, they said, stop, we can't take in any more money. That's the direct, but even indirect. We saw an uptick in giving to New York City immigration assistance organizations because they were helping people and communities who were negatively impacted by bias crimes, especially immediately thereafter. And we know that life events change giving on an individual level. If people move, if a loved one dies, if you are divorced, get married, those sorts of things impact so many different things in your life, and you're open to changing your existing patterns. And we're existing in a time when 30% of donors surveyed said they have shifted to working from home, and another 11% said not only am I working from home, but I'm also providing childcare while I'm working. So 41% have made that switch. 13% said they're homeschooling their children. 8% of people said they've lost friends or family to COVID-19, and 3% said they've been sickened themselves. And so and we'll talk more about this survey later on because it goes directly to motivation for giving. But when you're in that much flux, you're willing to change other behaviors as well. The behaviors that we have personally taken on about mask wearing, distance from people, which loved ones do you see, how do you go out to the store, those sorts of things. If those are in flux, then anything can be in flux, and giving's no different. So we have seen this influx of people coming into philanthropy and into our organizations, which is great because we need their support to match the times that we're up against. The challenge, and it is an eternal challenge when there's a significant uptick in giving, is that this type of reactive giving, not necessarily disaster giving in this case, because that has that quick uptick, quick drop, but reactive giving to a crisis, more like the Great Recession, more like 9/11 and the events that followed after it, that type of reactive giving doesn't sustain. So looking at what happened after the 2016 election, I'm sorry, this is next slide's 2016 election. This one is actual disaster campaigns and hurricanes, and this is from Classy. They looked at the people who started recurring donations, usually those recurring donors being our strongest at any time. They looked at their retention rates over time, and you can see this significant drop off where you have a sub 50% retention rate for even recurring donors who come in on a disaster campaign. And we know that the average sustaining donor is far more close to this gray line, where you have people coming to the organization because of the organization, because of who they themselves are, and they tend to stick with organizations. So they have the same retention rate at 5 months that non-disaster campaigns have at 2 years. This is what we're up against. And we've seen it recently in terms of a longer term impact, not just a natural disaster. We're looking at how people reacted to the 2016 election. And we saw people on both sides of the political aisle increase their giving during that time. Conservatives, by and large, to organizations where they wanted to lock in their wins, progressives and liberals wanting to give to organizations that they felt were being threatened during that time. And so from 2016 to 2018, Edge Research took a look at how those reactive givers behaved. And we'll talk about this survey in a few different places. But one of the more telling is, as of the end of essentially of 2017, they asked folks, when did you make your last donation in this way? Ignoring the generational dynamics for a moment here, looking at the total column, you can see that about half of people said they're not sure, or it was more than 6 months ago. I'm going to group not sure in with more than 6 months ago, or that people are extremely forgetful. So you have about half of people who at this point, this survey came out in April 2018, would be likely considered to be lapsed. People who were reactive givers, they gave, and then they were done. And you could very easily see that happening with the COVID-19 donor, whether it's fatigue over the issue itself, or whether it's the folks who say, I've done my part. This is what we're looking to guard against. There's also some helpful things in that you can see that within the last 3 months, 36% of people still continue to give, and that's a year and a half after the election. So there is some promise there as well. So why are these donors not retaining? And I've read, to prepare for this and just in general, I've read a lot of different viewpoints on how to deal with disaster donors and reactive donors and that sort of thing. And there is this strain of thought that says these donors are bless and release. They are not worth your time. They are not worth your treasure. They come in, take their donation, thank them, be appreciative of the ones that stay behind, but don't throw, in one writer's words, good money after bad. I would submit quite the opposite, that it's not all about the person, it's about the way that we treat that person. So a few different reasons. First is that giving is not a habit for some of these donors. When you looked at politically reactive givers in 2016, 20% of them were brand spanking new to file, not just new to that organization's file, but had not been seen to be giving to organizations overall. Now that's probably a little high. It's always tough to get a survey of every nonprofit organization that's out there, but that's compared with 10% for non-reactive donors. And so as the proportion of newness goes up, people who have not been trained, so to speak, or who are not active philanthropic givers, don't know what we're expecting, which is hopefully that they will give and continue to give and become lifelong givers. That's perhaps not in some of their DNA. I say it's in their nature because if you have a donor who is a reactive giver in and of themselves, they will give to hurricanes and typhoons and elections that they consider to be a disaster or a godsend one way or the other, or they will give because of COVID-19. It's that type of immediacy that is part of their reason for giving. And if there isn't that same immediacy going forward, that may fail to grab their attention. We also don't have the same levers to retain, and this is where it starts to get on us rather than to be on the donors themselves. One of the things that you always do in mail or email is you know that here are the people who gave to this piece or this type of messaging before. You know, you can go back 3 years on your member card mailing and see the person who gave to this piece 3 years ago is still more likely than even an active donor who hasn't given to that piece in the past, because they respond to that technique, to that message. They know that this is the time to give. Same thing online and offline for match campaigns. You have some donors, they respond to matches, you send them a match, they send you a donation, or at least they're far more likely to send a donation. God help us all if we are fundraising 2 years from now on COVID-19 messaging, or COVID-20 or COVID-21 messaging. That's not where we want to be. And so the messages that we're using right now, God willing, are for the now. And so if you brought someone in new to your organization on a message of, here are the things that we're doing to stop COVID-19, or here are the things that we're doing despite COVID-19, or that type of messaging, that hopefully will be extremely difficult to replicate in a year. And so we're missing that lever. And then finally, the biggest reason that I object to the, oh, you're throwing good money after bad school, is that that often happens when you drop the person into the middle of your existing communications stream and you assume that they're the same. They are not the same. Their reasons for giving are different from your regular donors. And this is a problem in testing all the way across the board. Those of you who are mail people, goodness knows I've done the fun premium versus non-premium test. And you'll find that even if you have a premium file, even if you bring in a non-premium donor, they won't do as well with lifetime value because that's not how your file's set up. You know, if you bring in a non-premium donor who doesn't like to get tchotchkes and all you send them are tchotchkes, they're going to flip out, or vice versa. And then same thing, testing a non-premium messaging donor to a donor file. That's going to be rejected just by the nature of the people that you have there. It doesn't mean that you can't have those donors. It just means that you don't currently have those donors. It's the same thing here. If you drop people who have different reasons for giving and different priorities for their gifts into your regular communication stream, that becomes problematic. So the gap we have to fill is looking at, and this is disaster giving again from Indiana University. They found that 31% in 2017 donated to a 2017 disaster, and 5% of people donated to that same disaster messaging in 2018. The messaging didn't have the same lifespan, and so hopefully will we be in that place. So that is the articulation of the problem and the blessing. The blessing is that we have these donors. The problem is that in order for us to be able to sustain and be sustainable, we need to retain these donors. So pausing here for just a moment to grab a drink, and please ask any questions that you have about the nature of the problem in either the question and answer or in the chat. And I'm going to hope that I was not on mute this whole time. So If I'm not on mute, throw something into the chat just to make me feel a little better, and I will go on. So, talking about solutions. Let's talk a little, okay, I got a note, we can hear you. Thank you, Kimberly, thank you, Lauren, excellent. Shout out your questions as well. Love to be able to answer anything that I can. So I titled this apparently, let's talk why people giving. Let's translate that out of Nick to say, let's talk about why people are giving. And excuse my grammar faux pas for the moment. So this was the reactive givers study. They asked them, why did you make your gift? And the top two reasons were, and remember, these are folks that a lot of folks labeled rage givers. They saw election results that they did not like, and they gave to an organization they felt was threatened. Rage givers. But you ask them why they gave, and the top two reasons were hope and empowerment. It's very different from what we would expect from a rage giver that you'd expect to be turning from mild-mannered Bruce Banner into the Hulk at any point. Most people aren't citing the emotions that they had from the news. They're citing the emotion that they sought from the gift. Now, this is a survey. Surveys are notoriously bad at discerning why people did something, because people aren't actively lying to you. People lack metacognition. They don't know, and they say we don't know why we do things, and we'll make up great reasons after the fact, usually noble sounding reasons, but we don't really know. So let's look at the research on why people are actually giving and how emotion plays into it. And this is a bit of a detour for a couple of minutes, but hopefully it'll be worthwhile. So the classic model that we talk about is the donor feels something and they give. We make them feel sad with our Sarah McLachlan spot, and they're so overcome that they give. And this is true. You need that sort of input to start, but it is incomplete. The donor feels something, they give because of how they want to feel. And the reason that I say that is that there was a study with the magic mood freezing pill that clears all of this up. Now, you may be screaming at your screen right now, magic mood freezing pills don't exist. Otherwise, I wish I'd taken one in March or in January before 2020 struck. Yeah, they don't exist. However, the placebo effect does exist. So people believe that they'll have the impact from medicine that people tell them it will have, even if that active ingredient isn't present. There are wonderfully interesting studies of people being told they are drinking alcohol and acting drunk, even though they have drunk no alcohol, for example. So researchers got people happy or sad or neutral by asking them to think about happy, sad, neutral things. And they told half of those people, you're going to take the magic mood freezing pill. Your mood will not change for the next hour, no matter what you do. Other half of people, no pill. Then they asked all of these people to help. So if people were helping because they feel bad, you would expect that the people who were made sad would be most likely to help, whether or not they took the pill. But what really happened is the people who were most likely to help were sad people who believed they could change their mood. When they thought their mood couldn't change, they did not help, or they didn't help as much. The people who were most likely to help were those who were sad, but who could change their mood. And so the act of helping wasn't because they were sad, it was because they wanted to feel better. If you can't feel better, then why change your behavior? So how does that manifest in giving? This was a test done with Catholic Relief Services. They put a PS on to an emergency email appeal. One was, your gift today will make a big difference when the next emergency hits. And then PS, same thing. Also, did you know that helping others can make us feel proud too? This is not exactly a scalpel, it's more of a club approach. to say, you will feel proud if you do this thing. Doesn't quite come all the way out and say that, but it's pretty clear. And this change in the PS led to an 81% increase in donations, just from explicitly saying you'll feel proud as a result of this gift. This isn't the only area where this works. There was a study of what someone would do in terms of environmental action, and specifically the emotion of pride. What they found was you were more likely to donate, opt in and pay extra for green amenities in your apartment, buy green products, take green actions. Basically, that you were more willing to help the environment in every case if you were told you would feel proud as a result of taking the action. Making someone say guilt avoidance, the idea that you'll feel guilty unless you do this, not only didn't work in most of the cases, it was actively negative. It made someone less likely to buy green amenities or products or those sorts of things. The only area in which it worked was in donations. And there's additional research that says that guilt avoidance is a okay way of getting a donation, and it is a very poor way of getting a donor who will come back to you. I mean, why would you go back to an organization that consistently makes you feel guilty? That doesn't seem right. And so pride can be really powerful. So with that in mind, thinking about the COVID-19 donor, what does that donor want to feel? So this was a study earlier on in the pandemic. This was April, not quite the before times, but in it. YouGov poll, and they asked how people were feeling. And the top answers were frustrated, bored, stressed. Bored is, this was during quarantine. And so you had a significant jump up in bored. Little did those people know that they'd be living off of their Netflix queue for the next 3 months and possibly beyond that. But frustrated and stressed, still very high in the nation's consciousness. So moving beyond that to the way that a donor would be thinking about it now, the American Psychological Association, which apparently is more than just a creator of the citation methodology, did a survey of Americans, and they found that a few things, that preventative measures are reassuring, that across the political spectrum, we're stressed out when people don't use them. We're generally stressed out right now. And in fact, not just the pandemic, but the political climate is a source of stress for us right now. Across the political spectrum, it's nice when we can see things that are bipartisan. It's not nice when everyone is stressed and at our wit's end, but we are. So we have this feeling of stress. And in fact, this is the study I referenced earlier, the O'Brien Garrett TMPA study. And looking at this, you'll see that I am struggling with stress and anxiety. This is donors who were polled. 35% said that's true, more than any other impact of coronavirus. 13% of people say there's been no impact on my life. I'm not quite sure who those people are, but I would be very interested to hear what their experience has been. So 35% of people say they're struggling from stress and anxiety, but you can also see different reasons that someone might be engaging with us right now. I'm working from home, I'm homeschooling my children, we're probably getting cut off to some extent by the people who say, family members lost a job, I've lost a job, those sorts of things. And then there are the people who have been directly impacted or indirectly impacted by the disease. I've lost friends and family. I myself have been impacted. And so you can see all of these differences at play. If you were looking at trying to do a broad stroke look at anyone who's a COVID-19 donor, then you would say stress and anxiety is the emotion they're feeling right now, and possibly the one they want to get rid of. So going back to the reactive giving, hope and empowerment, that type of empowerment can be very powerful in this time. There's a lot in our lives, and the stressors that we have are by and large things that we cannot control. And so giving someone and telling someone that they have control, and better yet, that they can create that and create it for others, is powerful. Hope is powerful. Working with other people at a time that we can't physically come together with them are probably all things that are contributing to the mindset of a COVID-19 donor, someone who has come into your file anew during this time. So, some techniques that can take advantage of this. There's the "but you're free to say no" technique. And this, there's a wonderful meta-study on this. They looked at 42 different studies that found that this phrase increased compliance in almost every context. Telling someone that they are free to say no. Yes, it's something that they know, but they don't feel forced into it. It works a little bit better in face-to-face interactions, but it is tested positively in letters, in emails as well. So giving someone of control is really powerful right now, especially when someone is feeling out of control. Having this be one part of their life that they can control is important. And especially as we're setting up things like recurring giving, all of those wonderful phrases that we frequently use, you can cancel at any time, or you can change your gift at any time. It is easy to make changes. You are in control of your giving. Those probably are going to be more persuasive now than ever before. The idea of social proof, if other people are doing this, then it must be good, could be particularly powerful right now as people want to join together. So that is a technique that we recommend. Looking at telling people what they've already done and giving them that sense, and we'll talk a little bit about more of this later on, because reporting out and reporting impact is so vital. Don't want to leave it as just one bullet point, but that also gives a sense of both hope and control. I am in control of the situation. I was able to do this, and the fact that I'm able to do this gives me hope that I can do other things as well. And any sort of reactive giver is going to be reacting to what they feel is an urgent need. And so these donors we may not be able to pull out the COVID-19 email, dust it off next year and send it out again like you would your match campaign or your end of year giving or Giving Tuesday. But creating that urgency for someone, again, talking about that urgent need, just as they felt here. If you can't replicate the exact circumstances, you can do something fairly close to that. All of this requires separate communications. So CARE's logo is up here because they had one of the really nice early tests of this. Following the Indonesian tsunami of 2004, they were well equipped to be providing support to those who were impacted by the disaster. They, after previous emergencies, they'd thank donors and then drop them into the mainstream. And they said, "My goodness, these donors are retaining horribly. Why do we even acquire them?" With the tsunami donors, they tried a different approach. And they created a stewardship program specifically for these people. And they consciously worked to tie the message that they had been using to the one that they were using. So the message to these donors was, poverty is the silent tsunami. You've given to a tsunami. This is the next iteration of that. And so the goal was to gain support for their general mission by tying it directly to people's reason for giving. And that substantially increased their retention efforts. So what we've talked about so far is all hopefully good and positive, and talking about how we can not only increase our retention, but we can be a part of our donors' journey to mental health. In times of lack of control, in times of stress, that idea that I'm doing one good thing that I control, that no one can take away from me, can really help your donors. I would say just as much as you, although you probably benefit a little bit more in terms of your organization helping achieve those goals that you're looking to meet. But it's blanket. So how do you customize your message? Because this is all one size fits all, assembly level. Let's separate out. Yes, it's separating out the reactive donors, and honestly, having two streams of communication is far better than one. So even if you just did the first half of this presentation, you'd be that much better off. But returning to this graph, we saw many different ways that people have been interacting with COVID-19 and with a lot of the other issues that we've seen recently. There are going to be different ways, although it's not as well surveyed, unfortunately, that people are reacting to the social justice movements going on right now in a lot of American cities. Their interaction with that, with COVID-19, all of those things are going to be very varied and may have a substantial relationship on why they're giving to you and how they're giving to you. So let's take a really simple example of this, not from the disaster realm, but from Donor Voices work in the UK with the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds. They asked people's identity up front on an inbound call, and then they played it back to them at the end as they were making the ask. So, are you bird? Are you general nature person? Pretty simple question. And then playing that back at the end, that caused a 15% increase in donations and a 15% increase in average gift. That was on the acquisition side. Imagine how much more important it is that the people who donate to you, the people who are on board with you, know that you know them as well. So this is a learning process. We're learning through surveys, online and offline, why someone's giving, the impact they want to have, channel preferences, and satisfaction. If you can do only those four things, you will be miles ahead in your ability to customize your message to the person. Why they're giving, going to that kind of COVID identity or going to their identity as it relates to your organization. Are they looking for a COVID specific impact, a social justice specific impact, or are they just wanting to give where it's needed most? Channel preferences, we've all seen those graphs at conferences that say, oh, the multi-channel donor raises so much more money than the single channel donor. You can get more money out of your donors if you can get them to go multi-channel. That whole thought process is flawed. It doesn't take into account that the people who are multi-channel donors may be different in some way from single channel. They may want to hear from you because they're more committed to your organization. That said, knowing that information is a really valuable thing, and you want to have those multi-channels open to those people to get that type of value out of them. And then satisfaction, we assume that when we get the donation, that someone's experience has been fine. But I got my driver's license from the DMV, and that wasn't a great experience. Especially when you have new people coming to the organization. Hopefully people have been beating down your door. And those new people aren't as used to your message, aren't as used to your donation form. They may not know where to go on your site. And thus, as you bring in more people, the more likely they are to be neutral or dissatisfied with their experience with you. And that's not on them, and it's not necessarily on you, it just is. But surveying their satisfaction and making the types of changes they recommend will not only help you with that donor, it will help you for all of the other donors and for their subsequent gifts. So not only does getting this information help you with future appeals, asking itself can be a benefit. So this is the American Diabetes Association. They tested their mail year-end gift form. All they did was say, share with us your highest priority for us as an organization. 4 fairly simple ways of looking at things. And as you might guess, donors to the American Diabetes Association have very different ways of thinking what the priority of the organization should be. If you have diabetes, it's far more likely to be things like access to care and treatment. If you don't have diabetes, it's far more likely to, can you cure this thing before I do? Painting with a broad brush, but very different reasons for giving. And when you put when you can customize a letter, an email, a communication to one of those reasons, you're so much better off later on. But it also helps you show that you care. Just that change, increase in average gift and an increase in revenue, plus capturing that information to go forward and being able to customize future communications. Similarly, the Heritage Foundation, they tested on their donation form, and they worked with Next After on this, and this study is on the Next After website. They added a little thing, and I'm going to zoom in on it. It's going to get a little pixelated, my apologies. Where should Heritage focus its efforts? And there was a drop down. Notice the language here. Neither American Diabetes nor Heritage Foundation really wanted to restrict these gifts, because that requires going 15 rounds with the finance department. But what's your priority? Where should we focus our efforts? Adding that increased conversion by 34%. So the act of asking can increase your donations. Now you may say, these are COVID-19 donors, they're already here. I can't ask them at their point of acquisition. And what I would say is there's a Chinese proverb that said that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is now. And so, yes, your donation form may not have included this, but it is an excellent time to go back to those donors and ask about their priorities, ask about channels, satisfaction with the experience. All of those things are going to be better now than not happening at all. And you may say, and your staff may say, when we send out surveys, we don't get a lot of responses. Single digit, sometimes high single digit, but single digit response rates. Why do we even bother? And the answer is, first, it's an iterative process. If you said, oh, I sent out this mailing, it had a single digit response rate, I'm going to stop doing that. That wouldn't be a good approach. But not answering is also an answer. So DonorsChoose looked at the donors to its organization, and it found first, people really broke out by teacher referred, not teacher referred. If you were referred by a teacher, you're likely to make a gift to support your child's classroom or that teacher's particular project and not support any others. So significant difference in average gift and in retention rate if you're teacher referred or not. But even more significant is, did you, when you filled in the form, give additional information? There are 2 additional fields that you can fill in: the time of acquisition, and then also there's subsequent surveys. The people who gave information were 2 to 3 times more likely to retain, and their average gift was 30 to 50% higher than those who didn't. So failure to answer itself is an answer in and of itself. Is this going back to the person that I criticized a little bit up front, are we throwing good money after bad? Maybe with some donors. Finding out who those donors are, a really valuable process. And so people usually talk about asking, acknowledging the gift, talking about the impact before you ask again. We would add another part to that donor retention process. It's appealing, it's appreciating, it's asking, seeking donor intent and information about that donor, permission to talk to them again, and then communicating the impact. Because it's only when you know what impact they wanted to have that you can really talk to them about what impact they did have in a compelling way. This was from the Indiana University study of disaster donors. They asked, what could someone have done to get more in terms of donations from you? So this is part of an average gift question. It's part of a retention question. So number 1 is, if someone we know was directly affected by disasters, well, we know we're not going to change that. You know, we're not going to walk to a donor's house and smack their mother upside the head with a tornado, and that causes them to give more, I hope. But the number 2 here is, could determine the effectiveness or impact of our gift. Number 2 thing that you can do to get more out of donors who are giving, in this case disaster, but giving reactively, And that isn't a one-size-fits-all impact. It can be if it has to be. But once you know more about why the person's giving and who they are, then you can report back even more granularly. And that is what helps you get the next gift. So once you've learned, once you've gotten into the mind of your donor, once you have all of these questions going in, you're going to also be throwing, hopefully, all of this into a wonderfully rich data stew. That's zero-party data, the things that people ask you in answering questions, whether that data was answered. That's things like, did they come to your website? What are their previous giving patterns? What is their overall philanthropic giving? Were they satisfied with the process? Did they want to engage with you in multiple channels? That 10% of people who are brand spanking new to giving, assuming that holds for COVID-19 as well, those people love that they're coming into philanthropy, but statistically they are less likely to retain. People who don't answer questions are less likely to retain. People who stay in one channel are less likely to retain. Dissatisfied people, people who have not given to you previously, people who give you certain answers like I was teacher acquired, or no, I don't know anyone who is directly impacted. Those types of answers to questions really change whether someone's going to be with you for the long haul. So that type of modeling, extremely valuable. And it shows you it not only helps your retention rate, but it shows you how to deploy your resources. So Canadian Red Cross modeled their file, their sustainer file in particular, and they said, let's take the people who are at risk of lapsing in our first 3 months, because we can know this from the data. This is a knowable thing. And let's call them, and just thank them for their gifts, see if there's anything they need, a complete no-ask call. Turns out, 3-month retention rate, the control audience who didn't get a call, about 72%, test audience about 85%. Oh, jumping up 14 percentage points. That actually sounds more, if I rephrase it slightly. In the control, they had twice the bleed of donors than in the test. That call, a $4 phone call, saved a huge amount of $400 relationships because they knew who was going to lapse and they took actions to help prevent it. We know that folks like the World War II Museum are doing this right now. They sent out a robocall to 56,000 donors, just thanking them for their support in this time of need. The museum is closed, but the mission still goes on. And for those types of organizations that aren't on the front lines, the message is still very compelling. What kind of society do you want to have once we get out of COVID-19? So let's put all of this together, and we're going to use here an example of what the Humane Society has done during disasters. They had a call to thank program that was wonderful enough that people posted about it on Facebook saying it made my day. They had robust reporting on gift impact. And this is an organization that during Hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria provided tens of thousands of pounds of supplies for humans and non-human animals, thanks to their 62,000 new donors to the organization who are specific to disaster relief. But how do we retain them? Part of it's robust reporting and acknowledging, yes, in the wake of Harvey and Irma, that is why you gave, that is hopefully why you'll give again. They asked for a second gift specific to monthly giving conversion. We know the retention rate on those is much better, but they did it after learning more about the donor, asking them to become a humane hero after they knew whether they were dog or cat people, why their gift was made, those sorts of things. Their ads then were specific to what they learned about the donor. This is clearly a dog person who received. This one's an email, but they also had ads that were similarly branded. Then and only then, once they have exhausted all of the personalized, all of the ways they knew of to try to bring that donor back into the fold, specific to why they were giving in the first place? Did that donor then go into the general bucket? And that's going to be a valuable name still, because you'll be able to do merge purge against it if you find out that person's giving to other organizations. You can try periodic messaging to try to bring them back into the field. You know they're a disaster donor, so the next time a hurricane comes through, you can talk to them again. Similar to what we're talking about with COVID-19, you can try to do what CARE did and draw the line from where we are now to the need that will exist after. But it really does put it all together into one package. And so there was a great summary of this from the reactive giving study that found out about being donor-centered. It's figuring out channel preferences, targeting your message, going to the emotional triggers of why someone's giving, and realizing that real life does intervene. We are dealing with a population, some have lost jobs, family and members have lost jobs. In some cases, the people that we are working to help are the people who were our donors. Mixing urgency, hope, and progress, having that emotional outcome. To that, I'd add control. That I think is a bit new to this particular disaster. You'll want to do your own testing to find out why your own donors are there. There's a wonderful test that tested 3 different types of organizations in a grocery store, found that 3 different emotional outcomes worked best for those 3 different organizations. One was ACO. I forget the other 2, I apologize. But you'll want to do some testing. Hopefully this is a start on thinking about what those gift outcomes are and feeling as if their efforts made a difference, and to that I would add, made the difference that they wanted it to make. So that's the slide portion of the show. Let me stop sharing my screen. And chat's been quiet, Q&A's been quiet. Would love to hear any questions or thoughts you had. And while we're doing that, let me get in a couple of plugs. Those of you coming to the webinar, we'll have a couple of new webinars coming up. You're just now getting the times and titles and all of those things going on, but there will be 2 about digital fundraising, one about some new channels like Twitch, Twitter, TikTok, possibly some other ones that aren't starting with the letter T, but I like the alliteration for now. And then we'll also be talking in a second webinar about how to break out of walled gardens. You know, Facebook and Google are great for attracting donors, great for communicating with donors, but we know that every time you enter their garden, you pay a toll. So how do we bring people in? And so that'll include content marketing examples and video and integrating some of our video assets between TV and online. Some wonderful things you won't want to miss. I'll be emailing you about those. I will also say we'll be sending out the recording of this and the slide deck once we have it. Since I'm not seeing any questions, feel free, if you're feeling a little bit shy, to email me any questions. I'm at nellinger@mooredmgroup.com. It's NELLINGER at mooredmgroup.com. Have a comment here, super interesting. These sound very much like the same techniques we apply to all donors. Absolutely, only more so. The challenge with the disaster donor, reactive donor, the COVID-19 donor, these are a lot of them are techniques that you hopefully are employing in other ways, but because of the challenges of retention, you can, if you are acquiring someone with the same mail package that you have for the past 10 years, you can count on the person coming in through the mail to be a little bit like the person you acquired 10 years ago, and that cadence should work for them. But for these new types of donors coming in on new messages with new motivations, you take those same techniques and you have to turn them up to 11 in order to get them to retain. It really is about honing in on the why and the how of that donor and reaching them where they live.